Hello and welcome to TE Present Teacher by Things Education. I am your host Aniruddh, and today we are talking about the reading crisis in the world and specifically the reading crisis in India. And I am lucky enough to be working with every day with one of the top three foundational learning experts of the country. And that is, of course, Ritu. Hi, Ritu.
Hi.
Welcome to today's episode. And yeah, I mean, we've done 5 episodes now, and a lot of them were kind of connected to each other, linked to each other. Um, Today, we are going to move a little bit away from that. And I we thought that there should be something about foundational learning as well. When we thought of talking about something in foundational learning, I think the first thought was the reading crisis. Because the reading crisis is the most important thing that is happening in the country right now. And secondly, I think it's one of the things that does get spoken about a lot. It gets a lot of media attention. And I think primarily because of the annual reports that Pratham does, the ASA reports. So let's start with that. I think that's a great place to start. So Ritu, can you shed a little bit of light on the report itself and what are the key takeaways from that?
So, I think what we've been hearing and seeing from the reports over years and years and years now is that um, a student at a grade 4 level is not reading at grade level, a student at a grade 8 level is not reading at grade level. And it's not just a difference of a grade or two, most of them seem to be struggling at a grade 2 level of reading. And that means that given a simple text with simple words and short sentences, which a grade 2 student should be able to read fluently, um, students at a grade 8 level are also struggling with that. Now, I think here it's important to highlight something that is often confused. Mm, there are two aspects of reading that we have to keep in mind. One is just being able to read fluently, and that means that look at words, decode them in your mind, and read a sentence at a reasonable speed and correctly. Uh, a lot of students may also be able to read fluently. They'll know the sounds of the letters enough or have read those words enough to be able to read an entire sentence or read an entire paragraph. That still doesn't mean that they're understanding what they read. Mm. We've done this exercise with teachers as well. We've gotten them to read nonsensical words and they're able to read them with complete fluency, but because they're nonsensical words, we can't understand them. And that's the difference between fluency and reading. Um, a lot of words for kids may be nonsensical because they just don't know what they mean. Mm. What I think is happening right now is that students are struggling so much at just basic reading fluency that we're not even getting to really assessing them for comprehension.
Right. Um, so okay, so what we are saying is that yes, we are assessing them for fluency and maybe a little bit of comprehension, maybe sprinkled in somewhere. But it's not important to know the difference, and even if not the difference, but know that these are two different things, and we might need to test for them separately, or at least actively test for both of those things, and ensure that we are not what's it called?
We're not conflating the two because testing for a lot of reading fluency tests assume students can answer some questions about what they've just read. They are good at comprehension. Maybe they have basic comprehension, but lot is very nuanced. It's a lot deeper than just being able to answer some comprehension questions. And I don't think we've gotten to testing that yet because we're struggling with basic fluency.
Right. And I think, I think the implicit thing there is that we have not been able to test that at scale. I think people may be doing it at, very small, at their school level, at one preschool, etc. But at scale, we are not able to do that. Yeah, that's fair. Um, Okay, and I'm guessing that the pandemic hitting would have had an adverse effect on this, right? I mean, it would have exacerbated this situation. Um,
Yeah, definitely, and for different reasons. One being that not talking in the language that you're studying in hugely impacts reading. So if kids were stuck at home and they were not meeting their friends, they were not meeting their teachers, they were not using the language that they study in, that is going to impact reading. Secondly, um, reading is again, it's a social activity. You have to listen, speak. You There are a lot of aspects that happen only in school and not really at home. And something that may be counterintuitive is, I think, um, having a boom in tech during the pandemic may have actually adversely affected students' reading abilities.
right. So can we go a little bit deep? I mean, we'll go into deeper aspects of a lot of the things that you mentioned. Can we just go a little bit into the nuances of why tech would affect reading? Maybe a couple of sentences on that, maybe.
I think a lot of the um, apps that are built for reading are built keeping in mind that we want students to stay on the app, but that's not how reading works. There are a lot of bells and whistles which distract from you focusing on the sounds and you focusing on the comprehension. Um, there's a lot of gamification which again doesn't help. It may help keep the student on. It doesn't help in the because learning to read is tough. It's supposed to be tough. It's supposed to have adult intervention because it's not a natural process. It's not like learning to eat or walk that happens naturally for every human being. It's a very unnatural invention that we had that requires a lot of practice, and a lot of dedicated help from an adult. So leaving kids alone with a device, I think it comes down to this that we're so we're depending on these devices to support kids through reading, and it's taken over all their time. It's not going to help.
Right, right. That makes sense. I understand. So I think that the last part of it kind of summarized it well, that these devices or these apps can't be the whole end all of reading comprehension. And that's what kind of happened during the pandemic, which kind of exacerbated this entire issue. Yeah, that's fair. That's understandable. Okay, so reading levels not at grade levels. The pandemic hasn't helped things. In fact, it has probably, held students back. So it is a decently grave problem. And, you know, given that reading forms the basis of understanding not just language, but also anything else. Like even if I have to understand science, I need to be able to comprehend what I'm reading or whatever I want to, whatever other subjects I want to read, learn, etc. My comprehension has to be there. So not only is it a big problem, but it has huge impact on the rest of learning for a student. So given that, we need to find solutions for this. And, there are lots of people who are trying to look for these solutions. Um, and my argument would be solutions exist. But I think the approach is what we need to figure out, which is probably key here. So, and that's the kind of conversation I want to have today. That yes, let's talk about the solutions for a bit, but let's focus more on the approach of these solutions. And I think that there's one thing that we haven't mentioned. All of this in the context of English being the second or maybe even third language for a lot of these students, and a lot of these students being first generation learners, which means the support at home is going to be limited for English language development. So I think that I just wanted to set that context so that everyone understands who are these students that we're talking about. And even if solutions exist and we think that, हाँ, ये तो करते हैं, or yeah, we do these things, we know these solutions. Maybe what we need to then focus on, if we know the solutions, is the approach on how to use these solutions. So uh, now that I think I've set the context, let's start with the simpler bit first, I guess. What are the solutions? What are the things that we can do for students to build their comprehension abilities, to build their let's start with decoding or whatever, whatever leads to comprehension. Yeah.
I think the first thing that a lot of teachers already seem to know, but it doesn't get translated into practice, is that we start by building students' oral language abilities. Mm, we can't start by getting students to read, because that, again, like I said, it's very tough, and we have to connect reading to something that kids already know. Even adults learn how to read or learn a new language only when they listen to it and they speak that language over and over. So as an adult, I wouldn't start by reading a completely new language from a different country that I don't know. I'd start by listening and speaking and then gradually move on to reading. And it's the same way that it works with kids. Mm. So yeah, building their oral language skills through rhymes, through story, through basically just having fun talking in that language and building their confidence in understanding it and using it.
Right. So, I mean, this is very relatable in the sense that I don't think I started reading. Okay, so I didn't know Marathi till way into my mid 20s. Uh, I only started reading Marathi after about 5 years of listening to and then speaking Marathi with colleagues, etc. Because I was in Maharashtra. I think the similar thing can be said for you and Kannada. I don't know if how far ahead you are, but you're at least listening to Kannada in Bangalore a lot more than you would have anywhere else. Um, I'm not saying that you need to read Kannada. Okay, I'm just saying that hey, but I get that. I think that's relatable in the sense that s- listening, speaking is probably the basis of me learning the languages, even implicitly, even as a kid. Um, and so people since then know that this is how reading comprehension needs to be developed. So again, like I said, solutions are there and we kind of know them for a long time. Yeah, sorry, you were going to say something.
Yeah. Yeah, and like I said, I think a lot of teachers already know this and they understand the importance of rhymes and speaking in classrooms. The two things that we need to change about the approach here is that speaking doesn't just mean giving students limited chances to speak in some sort of disciplined manner and putting a stop to it. Speaking here means freedom to be noisy, freedom to be silly, which is something that we need to change in our schools, is giving students that kind of freedom. And secondly, doing this in a structured way. So these things have to be planned well in advance and in a systematic way through the year as to how we are building their speaking and listening skills as well. So, like you said, the solution exists. Teachers already know this. A lot of people already know this. Structuring it and doing it in that consistent manner is where I think where there's a long way to go.
Right. And okay, we can come to this later. But let's talk about some other solution. One is okay, oral language learning, what you've just mentioned. Are there other things that people have considered or you think are good solutions?
And I think the most obvious one here is phonics.
Okay.
Phonics has become well known in India, at least over the past 14, 15 years, I would say now. It is a term again that many teachers know, even non-language teachers would have heard this by now. And because policy has also said that phonics, an approach using phonics is important, schools are trying to implement it. So the solution exists, and there are good phonics programs that also exist. Mm, Again, mm, the approach to implementing a phonics program or implementing it well uh, there's a long way to go there, because there is a lot of there are a lot of misconceptions about what phonics is. A lot of teachers may confuse it with just what they're normally doing with letters of the alphabet. But that's not what phonics is. Phonics is about sounds and not letters. Um, and changing our approach to focus as opposed to reading or looking at letters. That's, I think, one of the key things that is missing. And secondly, doing it in a very, very structured way, because again, like I said, learning to read is not easy, and it's like learning to play a guitar. You wouldn't just give students a guitar and expect them to watch and practice it and be done with it. There are steps, there are steps to learning how to play the guitar, and it's the same with learning how to read letters of the alphabet.
Right. So, and when you say that phonics is important, and it is recognized that it is important, would you say that, I know you mentioned this, and I just wanted to get some clarification on that. When we're doing phonics, and you said that it's a study, or it's the approach that you use to understand the sound that a letter makes. Um, do we also in parallel learn writing the letters, or how does it go? Or should these be kind of independent of each other?
Um, Once you know how to hear the sound and say the sound, um, it's good to connect it to the letter. And at that point, you start recognizing the letter, you can start practicing how to write the letter. But you always start with this is, is the key here, that every letter makes different sounds, especially in English, especially vowels or combinations of vowels make different sounds. So kids do need to know that there are some basic sounds with, and the sound is spelled with this letter. And going forward, a different sound may be spelled by the same letter, which is too difficult for them to understand at that age. But the point is that unless we can hear and say a sound, knowing the letter, knowing how to write it, is not the most useful.
Right. Um, okay, so whatever it is, even if you're learning a letter in parallel, letters in parallel, uh, when we're talking about phonics, or when we're teaching phonics or facilitating the learning of phonics, it is extremely important that we only think of phonics, and keep that in mind. Uh, and just another clarification quickly. I think when Ritu said that a letter makes different, I mean, the letters make different sounds, she makes, I think she meant that one letter can make different kinds of sounds depending on the combination with other vowels, etc. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. From the examples that you're giving me, what I've understood is, yes, I've been reading about this for a long time, that, hi, all of these things are the solutions. Um, then, of course, my question is going to be to you, ki, we've known these solutions for a long time. Why? I mean, fine, we are not going to solve the reading crisis in, 5 years. It's going to take some time. But from what we see from the reports that come out every year, it doesn't even seem to be going in the right direction. Like we kind of plateaued, right? In terms of trying to find a solution. I mean, the solution is not working basically. These solutions are not working. So I think this is where our conversation on the approach would, I mean, this is where I would like to bring in our conversation on the approach. Um, Firstly, why are these solutions not working? And what can we do to change the approach of using these, general solutions that we've always spoken about?
I think that, especially coming from all of the courses that we've done with teachers specifically on these topics, what I have understood is that a lot of these solutions have remained buzzwords, and there is a deep understanding of how to approach all of these things. So one of the simplest that's coming to mind is when we do our phonics courses with teachers. and we introduce some of the tools that we use as part of our phonics program. We're doing small letters. We're starting with lowercase letters, and teachers immediately get worried and say, "But why are you doing small letters? Why we always start with big letters?" Um, and at that point, we ask them, "What is it like? If you look at any book, look at a children's book. Are they looking at capital letters or are they looking at small letters? Count the number of capital versus small." And it's a 95% lowercase, 5% uppercase, because we barely read uppercase letters when we're reading. And that's when it strikes them that, oh, we should start with small letters because that's what kids are reading. And I think those are the kinds of decisions that teachers have to be able to take. Uh, but we seem to be so ingrained in the way we have been taught that we start with capital and then move to small, that we're not seeing that this is not really a useful approach. Mm. So I think that it's good that the buzzwords happen because these have now become part of our vocabulary, but a deeper understanding is still needed. And um, instead of creating new solutions all the time, if the focus was more on how do we deepen these solutions to have a better approach.
When you say that we should approach it from a, start with lowercase letters for students, I mean, wouldn't a radical idea be to only introduce lowercase letters to the students? So whatever storybooks they're reading, whatever text they're reading, only has lowercase letters. I mean, yes, it's going to mess up the grammar rules for now. But even after full stop, have lowercase letters. It just to build that fluency in their reading, their decoding abilities, because they're not looking at two different. See, anyway, a letter can make more than one sound. Um, Now you have two different symbols which specify the same letter also. So, it's pretty cognitively challenging if I think about it that way. So, would it be a radical idea to just have, lowercase letters?
I
Is it
think
too
it would
radical?
be it would be too radical, I guess, because even um, in the real world, they're not going to encounter only lowercase everywhere. Even if they look at signs or like restaurant names that they used to, they will see uppercase letters. So building that stamina in them is important, but doing it in again a structured way where we're focusing more on lowercase, introducing the uppercase as something that you should know and you will learn over time is good.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. Um, I get what you're saying, that let's not create an artificial environment just to get students to focus on a specific aspect of reading and comprehension. Because I think I only mentioned that grammar and vocabulary are also parts of it, and you don't want to mess that up a lot uh, just to get this right. Fair enough. Okay, so one of the things that you're saying, if I have understood right, is that yes, the solutions exist. The way we approach those solutions need to change. And as an example, um, let's stop starting with uppercase letters. Let's start with lowercase letters. Um, when we are starting off letter recognition, letter writing, etc. Um, yeah, I think that is useful. So we're going to take a break now, and when we come back, we'll talk about um, some specific Indian contextual things. How context matters, why it's important, etc. And what are the possible approaches to the solution going forward.
Hi, we have developed an amazing tool to help teachers plan their lessons. TEPS, or Things Education's Pedagogical Strategies. TEPS helps teachers by reducing the time that they spend on planning lessons. TEPS also helps you if you want to try a different pedagogical approach to teaching. So, if you want to know how to teach a topic in a project based or inquiry based or even constructivist learning approach, TEPS is for you. TAPS helps even seasoned teachers with fresh ideas on how to teach specific topics. So, scan the QR code on the screen or visit taps.school and join a community of empowered educators. Great teaching begins with TAPS.
Hi, so welcome back. we were talking about the reading crisis in India and how, even though the solutions have been, sort of rolling around in our heads, in our implementation for a few years now, uh, there seems to be very little impact in terms of actually improving reading levels of students. And we're trying to figure out why that is happening. And one of the things that we have kind of zeroed in on is that the solutions are probably good, or actually not probably, the solutions are good. I think we think that it's the approach that we take for these solutions on how to implement these solutions, where the magic sauce lies. So, for example, uh, while approaching phonics, we spoke about how the approach to phonics should be a little different going forward. In the same way, we're going to, zoom out a little bit more and look at all the solutions together, and talk about some other aspects that we need to keep in mind while we are figuring out what approach needs to be used to implement these solutions. So yeah, Ritu, what else do you think we can keep in mind uh, while designing an approach for the solutions for the reading crisis?
So, when it comes to reading comprehension, I think one of the most important things that literature tells us, that research has shown us, is that inference making or gap filling is a very is probably the most crucial part of comprehension. Um, Anyone who writes a story or a poem on a sort of text is never going to give you all the information needed for you to understand that text. And so inference making, gap filling becomes a process that a lot of us do in our minds if we know how to read and comprehend well. But that is something that one, kids don't know how to do, and we have to teach them how to do it. But more importantly, we have to be aware of the fact that different kids are going to be filling in the gaps differently based on their background knowledge, based on their experiences at home, their culture, their language, and keeping those differences in mind, right from when you're selecting a text to when you're teaching any sort of text, becomes very important. And that's something that's not really being, it's not really a focus yet in a lot of programs that we've seen. So yeah, I think that's the bigger point that I wanted to make, and then we can go into nuances of what this means.
Right. So I understand that contextualizing is important. Um, so that would bring me. I mean, the first thought that comes to mind is when we look at textbooks, when we look at different publishing groups, they use a lot of these popular authors for their texts. Um, some Indian, some non-Indian as well. Um, do you think there's a scope or room for change there?
Yeah, I think one, there's a huge push for using stories by popular authors. And a lot of these popular authors end up being um, authors who wrote a century or so ago and have based their poems, their stories on context that even th- that most children in India won't know. And I'm not talking about children who are from disadvantaged backgrounds versus higher income families. I'm not talking about that. I'm just talking about in India that just wouldn't make sense to us. We have seen texts as that, like that as well. I think one of my favorite examples to give, and I give this example all the time, is a poem called Bed in Summer by a very, very popular English Scottish author, um, who writes about the fact that when writing from the point of view of a child who has to go to bed when the sun is still up, and he's very confused and he's very sad because when the sun is up, he's supposed to be playing outside, but in the summer, he's supposed to go to bed when the sun is up. Now, that's all the poem talks about. And um, in India, that just wouldn't make sense to anyone unless they were explained the fact that uh, in India, we always experience sunrise and sunset at pretty much similar, like within an hour and a half of each other. But in higher latitude places like England and Scotland and closer to those areas, the sun sets a lot later during summer and so on. But that's something that we learn only in grade 6 and grade 7, whereas this poem is usually taught in grade 2 or grade 3. Um, Now, without that context of why the poem is written the way it is written, it's impossible to understand it. And kids will just end up memorizing it and not really knowing what they're reading.
Right. So we could change the approach and talk about the fact that hey, things are different in other countries, without getting into the geography of it, because these kids are smaller. Would it still make sense to sort of even if this poem is in the textbook and you have to do it as a teacher, would I change my approach and say that hey, this is about some foreign land which experiences this, and can you empathize with the kid there? Like, would you not also want to do similar things? Or I mean, does that work, or it's just too far out there for, especially for grade 1, 2, 3 students? I'm asking you that.
I think it's too far out there. I think it's okay to have this poem as a supplementary reading in grade 6 because you can understand what this kid is going through. You're not just looking at it from a geography point of view, you're also looking at it from a people and a human and emotional point of view. But in grade 3, I think we can stick to learning about different animals. Like, I know I have seen these animals around me, but there are different animals in different countries, and that's something that's easier to grasp.
Right,
So we're
that makes sense.
definitely not saying that we shouldn't be using text from other countries. Of course, we have to expand our horizons and learn about the world around us. So that's not the point that I'm trying to make here. The point is that we have to be very careful in choosing texts and choosing what we're asking our students to deal with in their minds according to their age.
Right, that makes sense. So that is about, I'm going to say experiences that students have. I think a similar thing would also be true for the cultural background that they come from. Not just cultural background, but in India is also, there's a huge socio, but more importantly, economic divide within the country as well. So I think that also needs to be kept in mind. I'm guessing then if I kind of zoom into India, then.
Yeah, I think once we zoom into India, then we have to be mindful of not choosing texts that only students from advantaged backgrounds can relate to, or students who come from a lot of privilege can relate to. You have to be able to give children stories that relate to everyday life that we see outside, and um, markets and experiences that 90% of our country has, but not just having texts that only 10% of our students can relate to.
Right. So I mean, thinking that in that sense, uh, there needs to be two different kinds of approaches there. That A, the authors that we choose for our text need to be more diverse. Because there might be some authors that are actually writing about the experiences that 90% of the students are having. And the second is how do we, even if you're using these popular authors, how do we contextualize it for the students who have probably not experienced things that the authors are talking about? Okay, that's useful. My next thought is that okay, this is the reality of Indian students. This is what they experience. Um, Going deeper into that train of thought, um, and when we're talking about English language specifically, mm, there are going to be a lot of first generation learners in this 10 to 15 year period, and that is something that we have to be acutely aware of while we are thinking of the approach. uh, First is that they're going to be first generation learners. Sub point there is that even if they're not first generation learners, this is the generation that is going to learn English for the first time. So, a lot of things that you said regarding having conversations in that language, having, just general thoughts being exchanged, understanding how thoughts get formed in that language, are important things for us to pick up, or improve our reading comprehension. A lot of that is going to be missing from the home front for all of these students. Is that a fair thing to say?
Yeah. Um, I think we forget that again, we forget that reading is not a very natural activity, and especially if kids are coming from homes where the parents have not studied, they may not even know how to, what the right way to flip open a book is. Where do you start from? How do you look at letters and words from left to right, top to bottom? And those are skills we assume kids should have. And those are easily fixable, right? If you see that a kid the right way, you teach them how to open the book the right way. But then there are more nuanced things like how do you deal with stories? So that again, a very interesting study that comes to mind is where um, it was found that some kids who had come into kindergarten would always they'd be looking at a story and making up the story based on the pictures that they were seeing. And the teachers saw this happening with a few students who happened to belong to the same community, the same area in that town. And some people went in to see why this was happening because these kids would refuse to look at the words. They didn't even know that the words had any significance or what they were there for. So for them, storytelling or story reading was about looking at the pictures and making up stories. And what they found out was that that's because the parents didn't know how to read, but they brought in a lot of storybooks at home and used the pictures to tell their kids stories, and that's what the kids learned to do. Um, and so I think this is a very good example of how different kids will come in with different definitions of what it is to read, to speak, to share. And again, it's not possible for a teacher to, of course, know all of it. But just being aware that there is something going on in the background that may be leading to this, I think it helps teachers approach that problem with a little more empathy, knowing that um, it's not lack of skill or lack of effort. It is just something that they've learned and they may have to unlearn.
Right. And when you see this, that basically tells me that if the support system is not going to be there at home, uh, then what we do in school becomes even more crucial. If it is a second language, third language for most of the students, and there is very limited support at home, it has to be the school that needs to build in all of these things that you just mentioned. And let's be honest, I think there is at least one other organization that is cognizant of this fact that, oh, we have been talking about the reading crisis for a long time. There have been things that people have tried. It's not working. And I think Central Square Foundation, they've started a new early learning curriculum for literacy and numeracy. And I think they at least on paper they seem to be addressing these things, and we'll see the effects of them or the impact that they make in the coming years, hopefully. Um, so I think there are some people who are doing this and who are recognizing this, and I just wanted to call them out and say that, hey, yes, you've figured it out as well. So and I think what I would like you to do also is talk a little bit about our curriculum, our unboxed early learning curriculum, which kind of addresses a lot of these issues. And if you can give a few examples of what I mean an issue and how we are trying to address it. Um, I mean, I can think of a couple off the top of my head, but I'm going to let you go ahead and explain these.
Right. So the curriculum that we've created for the early years is for kids from age 3 to 6, but depending on when you're starting with these students, it can be moved up a couple of years. So, start at age 5 and go up to age 7, however it is. But what we've tried to do is keep a lot of these things in mind that we've just spoken about in this conversation, right from ensuring that there are very structured, fun oral language activities that kids do right from day one. Um, they're tagged to learning outcomes, they're tagged to developmental milestones. So there's a lot of structure behind it, but there's a lot of freedom for students to talk and share. We have a structured phonemic awareness uh, part to it, which helps them start listening to sounds, which is a very important part of phonics. The way we approach phonics is with a focus on sounds, introducing one lowercase letter at a time, followed by the uppercase form. And again, a very structured, systematic way of decoding and reading fluency. And I think what I'm the most proud of, I guess, within our curriculum is the kind of stories that we've written and illustrated for kids, which start with things that they're aware of that is around them and then keep expanding out. So we are ensuring that kids understand and relate to the stories, but they're also expanding their horizons through very relatable characters. And again, all of this is done keeping in mind uh, with very robust reading comprehension approaches, learning outcomes. So there's a whole structure to that as well, and how that needs to be approached. Um, there are many other aspects to the curriculum, like fine motor development, writing development, handwriting development, which are extremely well structured and are working well with the kids that are using, the schools that are using this curriculum.
Right. And if we just focus on the reading bit for now, I think the stories which you mentioned that, they start with things that students have already seen or experienced or at least know about. For example, in the first year, the first level, the stories are about the adventures of an elephant. Extremely, relatable example for Indian students. But by the third learning level or the third year, there is a story, I think, if I remember right, about deep sea diving and another one about a trip to Spain. Not that everyone is going to experience that, but the story was needed to what you said, like, expand the students' horizons that, hey, there's this whole world beneath the surface of the water, which let's just be aware of it. It expands the horizons there. So I get what you're saying, and I think it makes a lot of sense. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to share a link to our entire curriculum in the show notes. Also, we have a specific reading curriculum. Link to that will also be shared. Please go to that if you're interested in looking at it. And yeah, get in touch with us if you want any of these things. So yeah, I think this may be a good place to stop. Not only because I think we have covered a lot of the things that we wanted to talk about today, but also I think there are things to do and promises to keep right after this recording. So anyway, thanks a lot, Ritu, for taking this time. Thanks a lot, everyone, for watching. If you like the video, please subscribe and like the video, and please tell everyone about us. Tell everyone who are teaching foundational years, tell everyone who are trying to make policy, right? Please tell everyone. We're trying to keep this channel going. We're trying to keep this channel going on a free basis for as long as possible. All of these things, sharing, subscribing, commenting, etc., help us in keeping this free. So thanks a lot. Thanks, Ritu, and we'll see you next time.